Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the premier political, economic, and social podcast of the region, Grab a Coffee. And this is the first time we're seeing you post-Easter. Of course, we have a lot to talk about. We have a lot to get through this podcast. But first, we'll start with how did our respective Easters go? Mr. Simon Kasete, first of all, you denied Jesus. This is the very reason you have the name Simon Peter. But it was your birthday. So what did you do for
I think
your
the
birthday?
reason I have my name Simon Peter is because I was the first disciple to be called by the Christ.
The loved disciple.
He's not the one they refer to in the Gospels as the one Jesus loved, another guy, but the guy, the first person that he called out and said, Simon Peter, with your brother, come, I will make you fishers of men, as opposed to this kind of stuff you're doing on Lake Galilee and just fishing small little tilapias.
And then you denied the man 3 times.
Which is part of the script of his life. And I want to believe from my rudimentary understanding of the Bible, even Judas Iscariot was part of the script of the passion of the Christ. Someone would have to betray him for 30 silver pounds. And then the guy that he had entrusted with the leadership of his disciples would, at that critical hour, deny him. Because remember, on Thursday night, I think it was Thursday night or Friday night, when they went, Thursday night, as he was praying and asking his father, saying, my father, if it were possible, let this cup
be taken away from me,
but so let your will be done. At some point, he comes back to his disciples, among whom was my namesake, and says, you people are sleeping, it's about the hour. And Simon Peter told him, my Lord, wherever it is that they take you, whether in prison, whether to death, I will follow you. And that showed his level of commitment and loyalty, which, by the way, is a typical Simon thing. Anyone that is called Simon that does not exhibit that quality of loyalty is quite not it. Maybe they're Simon, but in small caps. And then Jesus looked at him and said, he knew the script, of course. He said, you, by the time the cock crows thrice, you will have denied me. And so it was.
So it was. More importantly, you celebrated your birthday over the weekend. What did you do for your birthday?
I just counted down years, made a few commitments, reflected on my life, and then, of course, was very grateful.
This is the sanitized version you want to tell our podcast listeners?
No, that's for sure. Not the sanitized version, but that's what it is. But even more personal is that at my current age, I have outlived both my parents. None of my parents made it to my current age, and that for me is a major milestone. And so for that reason, I have had a conversation with my God, and there is a mutual agreement that's not yet sealed in paper, but I have a feeling I'm going to live for another 50 years from today.
Do you know?
Minimum.
Do you know, this is going to be a very strange fact, but in the Qing dynasty, the Chinese Qing dynasty, they used to measure the progress of political society by how much longer you lived than
as
your parents.
Compared to your parents.
Yes. So if you lived much longer than your parents, then that dynasty was considered to be a more successful dynasty.
Here we are.
So I don't want to give our people in the NRM ideas, but they should flag it and say people are living much longer. But on the whole, people are actually living much longer.
Without a doubt.
People are living. Average life expectancy in Uganda now is in the 60s, the late 60s.
Well, it's not the time when we were born when life expectancy was in its 30s because there was a lot of war, there was the absence of food, basic requirements, and then, of course, there was a disease that just showed up somewhere in my single-digit years that, failed most parents of our kind of generation, and took, of course, some that also followed us. So this is what we would consider to be relatively peacetime. So now we die from lifestyle, disease, self-inflicted causes, reckless living and the like, but not natural.
I was actually pained. This young man, you might have known him actually, Sad. He was a photographer, a wildlife photographer, and an event photographer in general. I'd worked with him on a couple of campaigns. He died in a border accident. He was riding these huge sporty bikes, and I think they had a crash with a motorbike person, and he lost his life as a young man.
This Easter weekend has been a very difficult one for especially many people that I know and many others that I do not personally know, but I've read from different correspondences here and there. We've seen quite a bit of death. Around this festive season, I frankly continue to be thankful that I'm alive to tell the story. And no less than His Holiness the Pope also meets his death just the next morning after he celebrates Easter with all of us and, gives us that traditional Easter Sunday blessing from the balcony of St. Peter's Square. And the news coming in on Easter Monday morning is that Pope Francis is dead. Quite a somber moment for the Catholic.
Yeah, and we also lost John Kazora, so it now feels like a grieving podcast.
Absolutely, and many others that we may not even make mention of, but even in my, own, extended family, and uncle just passed on. So it's really difficult moments. There's someone I'd scheduled to interview for my other conversations around the incredible life story. They couldn't make it in time for our interview schedule because they had to go and bury someone that just died the night before. So it's been
a long weekend. But let's focus, the big story is really the death of the Pope. There are many ways to look at this story. But first, let's look at the legacy of this very particular Pope, Pope Francis. One, he rejected the official residence, the official papacy residence that's given, chose to live in what was considered a smaller motel. The very day that the white smoke came out, non-traditionally, typically popes bless the crowds before them. He asked the crowds to pray for him. That was a switch in tradition. He really departed a lot from canonical traditions that the church held. And some people said he was a massive reformer. Of course, he was a reformer to some extent, not a very huge, massive reformer. But you could see he was a reformed pope. How do you remember him? Let's start there before we get into...
Yeah, I remember in that November month of 2015 when he, like the other pope I had seen, visit Uganda, who's Pope John Paul II, who came in, I think, in February 1993 as a young little boy, but already in my teenage years. But this particular one was a very surreal experience for me. That number one, I was part of the team of the media houses working with, or associated with, that was part of the coverage crew. And so I remember staging up, shop somewhere around Charlie Wajeda near the Mgongo Matters Shrine. And he drove, right behind me, and I could really feel him within almost an arm's distance. Now, something really struck me about the pontiff in the sense that, my favorite car is always the G. Now it's G63 AMG. And that's the car that makes the base of the Pope Mobile. But this is one Pope that I saw from the word go, just from a mobility point of view, and he doesn't travel in that level of opulence. In fact, matter of fact, when he came to Uganda, he had 2 vehicles, but the spectacular one that he was traveling in for the most part was a small little, Kia, 4-door Kia.
The Pope Mobile.
Yeah.
But someone help me understand.
And that showed you about his simplicity.
Yes, what's that strong connection that Catholics have with the Pope? What explains the strong connection? He lives in the Vatican, nowhere near here. He doesn't speak to you every day. But there's this very strong fascination that people have with the Pope, that the mere mention, I remember, my mother worked for the Catholic Secretariat. I remember just the mere mention that the Pope was going to come to Uganda jolted the entire Catholic Church, and people were moving pieces simply because the man had said, I'm going to come. And this was almost years ahead of time.
Let's put it this way, Raymond. Religion is a facet of feeling. It's an emotion that is really best at the core of belief and faith. And that belief and faith is vested in environment of those to whom we see as vanguards of that faith. The Pope being what he is to the Catholic Church, revered as the Holy Father, taking on a long legacy. And we started this conversation from Simon Peter, that first disciple of Jesus, and he was actually only called Simon. It is Christ that named him Peter, and saying Peter, which means the rock on which the foundation of my church shall be built. And that's why at the Vatican, where Peter is said to have been hanged and buried right beneath the altar of St. Peter's Square, they call it the seat of St. Peter. Now, everybody that sits there, the successor of Simon Peter. So it's the reverment that's associated with the fact that this is disciple 001. And now the subsequent ones, this has been the 266th of such disciples. So there is an element of faith, of revirement that's around it. And of course, the Catholic Church has not made it easier for its followers by creating some mystery around it, some almost, you'd say, royalty around the person and the institution of the papacy. And so this is a pope, for example, Pope Francis, an Argentinian born, who was last there when he came for the conclave that eventually elected him as pope, and he has not returned. That shows you that, like we always say on this program, rare access.
Yeah.
Now, you must understand that Uganda is a blessed country in the whole of Africa to have had no less than 3 popes visited. The first pope that came to Uganda was Pope Paul VI, who showed up here in 1969 at the invitation of Mere Archbishop Emmanuel Nsubuga before he even became cardinal. Why? Because when he ascended to the papacy in 1965, almost a year or 2 later, he canonized and beatified the 22 Ugandan martyrs. So beyond just them being martyrs or killed for their religion, they were, taken canonized as saints. Now, there's no place in Africa that I know of, and someone need to correct me, perhaps even in the whole world, that has got the highest per capita martyred saints, except perhaps even Rome, than the Ugandan martyrs. So that alone had something to say about Uganda, the faith that the Catholic Church has, around here, the martyrs of Uganda. Then we've seen the subsequent popes, Pope John Paul II coming in here in 1993, and he visited the country extensively, more than any other pope ever did, because Pope Paul VI only visited Kampala and Entebbe. John Paul II came to Kampala, then he traveled to Kasese, and he went to Soroti. But Namugongo, he also showed up there and kissed the ground near the altar where the basilica is currently found. In November 2015, I was telling you, that's when I first saw Pope Francis, still at Namugongo, in his revirement of the 22 Ugandan martyrs. So there's something about the history of the Catholic Church in Uganda around the martyrs, the Catholic martyrs, the 22 of them. There are several others, by the way. The Anglicans have theirs, the Muslims have theirs, but the highest concentration being these 22 that were burnt and others that killed in different places, but part of the Catholic faith. That then brings the Catholic folk to the revirement of their religion. But let's also not forget a very important aspect of the Catholic Church in Uganda. The Catholic Church, for the most part, has provided a huge subsidy to government in terms of social service delivery.
That's I wanted to talk about the more political, social political lens of the church.
Even before we go to the social political, I mean, you imagine some of the best hospitals that anyone can talk about. So we have hospitals where people were born that they could never have afforded to be born at because of the level of the facilities in there and the customer care run by professional, non-Ugandan, but people of the Catholic, not laity, nuns, brothers, sisters, then schools like my alma mater, St. Mary's College, Kisui, Catholic founded and all that, own primary school. I was been in a Catholic school for my kindergarten, Our Lady of Africa, Buya, down St. Kitts to Bolobi. So when you're providing major social services like education and health, more than just religion, you will find a huge gravitas towards the revirement of who you are. And very finally, Raymond, many folks fear to go to the villages for Easter celebrations and Christmas celebrations because of the unending fundraising drives at their local non-Catholic churches. That the reverends, the deacon's house, they always have, that house is always under construction. That church always requires a canopy, needs a roof. But that you don't see with the Catholic Church, at least for the most part in my adult life. I've not seen the Catholic Church go out to almost an embarrassing level of fundraising for basic infrastructure, either a house of worship or a residential house for a prelate. I think the only time I have seen a fundraising drive was, again, towards the Pope's coming to Namugongo, this current deceased Pope, where we received a letter from the then Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Uganda, which letter, by the way, rubbed me extremely the wrong way, and I always ask God to forgive me of the sentiments I held for that particular period. In light of that letter, we were requested as the Catholic folk to contribute towards the further construction of the refurbishments to take place at the Namugongo Martyrs Shrine. And in that letter, he said, make your contributions for all you want, but we will not entertain coins. Now that hit me so hard. I was telling you that one of the major stories in the Bible that speaks to generous giving beyond even what you are naturally endowed with was that widow who all she had to her life was half a bottle, not even a full bottle, but she nonetheless donated it to the house of the Lord. Now, it's all those things coming together. There's several scholarships that have been offered by the Catholic Church. The opportunities beyond just physical infrastructure and education, but the opportunities for people that find themselves exceptionally brilliant but extremely poor, who have managed to see an education and change their communities and their own lives for the better, has come through from the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church, to me, I think is that religion that for the most part you can touch and feel.
Yeah, the touch and feel. I want to get to the more political aspects of the church. The Catholic Church, for example, is, I think, responsible for about 40% of our population, or no, around 40% of our population are Catholics, the largest population. But it's also the single biggest institutional landowner after government of Uganda.
True.
It's also the single biggest owner of schools after the government of Uganda. And it has some political positions too. It has political positions on wealth. It has political positions on types of education. It has had a strong political position on kinds of sexual and reproductive health education that can be given to people. And I had thought that this Pope had tried to reform the Vatican, and that reform would get to places like Uganda. So, for example, you own institutional land that could be used for other means to sort of shore up. We have income inequality in Uganda, for example. That income inequality can be solved by the Catholic Church being a little bit more inventive with the land holdings they have. We have one of the fastest growing teenage pregnancies, and those are things that you feel the Catholic Church should take a political position on and say, this thing that we have in the Catholic Church, that we do not permit any form of sexual and reproductive health education, but we also don't permit any form of birth control. Those are things that are political positions that affect outcomes in society. I felt like this Pope had pushed the battle a little bit to say, this church needs to reform. Do you feel like the Catholic Church in Uganda responded to him?
You would say that there has been reformation across the board even before the current Pope came in. But I also must tell you that reformation in the Catholic Church is really a very painstakingly slow process. That those who have tried to push reform at a pace slightly faster than the comfort of the Holy See or even the establishment have found themselves as Protestants. That's why, for example, the Anglican Church is, because there were certain reformations that had been put in place or had been mooted by Luther, was it Martin Luther?
Martin Luther, yes.
Martin Luther, that, the Catholic Church could not take at that particular time. So the Catholic Church in Uganda knows that it grounds itself in the conservativeness of the Catholic faith, as it were. Now, you talk about reforms in different places. Let me just paint a broader picture. There's some bit of reform. Let's not really. If you go to Zambia, in Zambia itself, you could say is about 80% Catholic-owned land. But you also know that there are establishments there, some iconic establishments built on what was hitherto Catholic land, but are there, and that land is not Catholic land. I mean, our friends from the United States of America will tell you that they have an embassy building there and other facilities on there. We have seen business people coming up with huge landmark hotels in what otherwise could have been Catholic land. I also, but also the Catholic Church itself believes that without seeding into other demographics of faiths or people or political institutions to build infrastructure there, they can build the infrastructure there themselves. They have a cathedral there, they've got an iconic hospital over there, they've got schools over there, and they allow also land for the city to breathe, recreational grounds and all other things. Now, how much has this Pope led his walk kind of outlook trickled down to Uganda? I wouldn't say it has been as fast as he possibly could have done. One, because like I said, our church is also, a little, conservative in its way. They take in a few things, but then there are some things, some aspects of when you showed it in, let's call it reproductive health, that are not necessarily very much in tandem with our cultural setting. Forget about the religious affiliation. I mean, when you talk about a certain attitude towards homosexual people or the LGBT that the Pope seemed to have kind of a soft fit for. For us here, there's the Catholic way of looking at it, and then there's the traditional way of looking at it that I am.
But
Catholic,
I mean,
yes, but
even if we
I'm also
moved away
traditional
from that and went into a cultural issue like divorce, he was slightly more open to divorced couples. He actually asked
that they can
be blessed, they can go ahead and have Holy Eucharist.
Yes.
Those are things that traditionally the church didn't allow. And we have, I mean, in this society, we have views on divorce. You'd see that he was pushing the envelope. I'm just not sure how much of that envelope was pushed in Uganda itself. But I could see that there was some growth, some progress in that
I'm
area.
not so sure whether the church now does not give Holy Communion to divorced couples, because usually divorced couples don't come wearing the word divorce on their forehead. And besides, you don't go to the church that really knows you for the most part.
Yeah.
I mean, a guy lives in Bulindo, he possibly was wedded in Our Lady of Africa, Mbuya, and then he goes to Virika in Fort Poto to have Holy Communion. How are they going to tell? So it's always a feeling in your heart when you come to the altar of the Lord, what you are supposed to partake of it, depending on your disposition. But needless to say, like those were propositions that he made, whose trickle-down effect has not come more like a snap of the finger. So I think there are conversations still going on, and there are many considerations the Episcopal Conference in Uganda is looking at to see to it that, look, and also the fact that Uganda, I mean, we are in a position where we are not very much connected to the Holy See, in the sense that we do not have an active cardinal. Yes. Emmanuel Cardinal Wamala, who is our only cardinal, is way above 80 years of age. He can't travel to the Holy See to partake of the conclave. I mean, I remember the last time when Pope John Paul II passed on, I was an active journalist. That was in 2005. And I remember interviewing Emmanuel Cardinal Wamala on his way to the Vatican. And he told me, yes, I'm going to the conclave. And I joked him, I said, you know, there's a chance you could return as the Pope. And he said, why not? I am eligible. And that was the headline of the Daily Monitor the next day. Cardinal Wamala could be the next Pope. Because yes, he stood a chance.
Yes, but that's also one of the areas in which people say...
So in the absence of an active cardinal, because again, I do not know, I know only 2 African countries that have 2 cardinals within the same place, in Nigeria, and I don't know where else. I know there's another. But we are unable to get an active cardinal at the moment because we still have a living.
Yeah, but I mean, if you consider East Africa, for example, amongst the people being suggested to be Pope, there's a cardinal in Kinshasa who might return as Pope.
Absolutely, and I think my money would be on him. Cardinal Ambongo,
one of 2, but
he has been very close at a very personal level with Pope Francis. I think I've had someone who knows these things from the Holy See who tells me that, you know, the Pope also receives the sacrament of penance.
Yes.
He also goes and confesses his sins, and he confesses to that one particular cardinal. And guess who this cardinal has been? Cardinal Ambongo, the cardinal of Kinshasa. He knows. He may not be the Camarego as we now know, but he has been one of those that has been very close.
Would you want to stake money? Do you think that we'll have a black Pope? It's highly unlikely, 1,000 years without having a Pope outside of Europe. This Pope was the first one in 1,000 years outside of Europe.
I'll tell you what. If there were one raffle ticket in this coffee mug,
yes,
with a bounty of $1 million, and it's just one, and you asked me, Simon, to draw that raffle, I will miss it. That's how unfortunate I am when it comes to betting, staking money, and all that. So I would rather. That's why I don't even support football, because I can't stand the pressure of loss. I just can't. So I wouldn't want to stake my money on whoever becomes pontiff, because at the end of the day, I'll still remain Simon Peter. No, then is going to come to change my name. But certainly, I want to believe that they meet a basic criteria beyond which my imagination lies, for whom I have every trust that they will live up to their billing. But suffice it to say is, the Vatican, or the Catholic Church, has seen many fasts, and in more recent years, I mean, after Pope John Paul II, the one who came to Uganda in 1993, was the first non-Italian Pope in centuries, or 500 years or 600 years, and there he was. We know, of course, now, it's been, and since then, Pope John Paul II, who was Polish, then there was this year, 1978, where there were 3 popes, a year of 3 popes, and then then Ratzinger came in. So you had a Polish, then you had German, and then Pope Francis, really by all intents and purposes, really is Italian, because his parents fled Italy from the fascist regime there. I mean, Raymond, would you want to call me Congolese, for example, if my parents left Uganda in 1979 because of Idi Amin War, settled in the DRC, and had me a year later, and then I become, whatever it is, but then you say he's Congolese. Technically, really, Pope Francis,
Uganda.
Jorge, as he was baptized, is Italian, but country of birth and all that and socialization is Argentina. And here we are celebrating him as the first non-European Pope in centuries. We don't know whether this could come to Africa. We can only hope that eventually there's a balance, but I also know that
it's actually not even likely that by the time we record the next podcast that we might have a Pope. It's not likely.
Possibly, yeah, because tomorrow is when we are going to have the funeral, and then the conclave will last normally another week. So
people are taking bets. There's an American company taking bets right now on how long it will go. So 1 to 3 days, 3 to 5 days, 5 to 6 days. So you can cast your bets if you want. But the last aspect I wanted us to speak about this subject, Simon, is the declining or waning influence of the Catholic Church amongst younger populations of Ugandans. Now more than ever, less and less young people are walking into the Catholic Church. That's recognized both in Uganda and even at the Vatican, that the population of Catholics is declining over time. Is it a matter of tradition? Is it a matter of change? Is it a matter of the fact that other things have come up now? You have the Anglican faith, you have the Pentecostals who have
Raymond,
come up. Yes.
Who do you know in your life has been a lay guy and has graduated to become a priest, a Catholic priest?
I wouldn't encourage you to ask that question.
Thank you.
Because I have some friends who are priests.
But you see, the kind of people that, they're your friends, yes, but they have a certain character that is not the kind of character you want to hang around for so long. There's a way they look at things, there's a way they are disposition, there is a way. So like guys from very poor families with very little exposure, so pious, they don't know anything else, end up in seminaries, and up the ranks they become clerics of the Catholic Church. And so they are preaching the way they preach when they get down to the homily. After the gospel, there's the homily, interpreting the first reading, second reading, and the gospel. They speak, I listen to the homilies. You need to have a certain level of intellectual depth, of faith in you to understand what the message is. It doesn't hit you. But look at what the Pentecostals do. The Pentecostals are giving you a prosperity gospel. They preach in a way that attracts people. It's more like a show. The Catholic Church tradition, hold yourself together. It's so structured. There's a way it is that doesn't bring a vibe. And young people are more about vibe. They are more about form as opposed to substance. And then when you cross that form into some kind of prosperity gospel and give examples that are real. Now, there's also expanding the gospel, talk about things that are real. Like if you're now talking about Palm Sunday and how Jesus, in a show of simplicity, sat on a donkey, and the prosperity gospel guys, we say, just imagine if the Lord just showed up here in a Lamborghini and was riding on a 6 lane. So you begin to see things that are in your lifetime. That draws people, of course. Then now the Catholic Church and our Gregorian chants and all this kind of hymning and singing that is feeling so heavenly, yes, but people want to have entertainment when they come to church. So there's that element. However, we've seen from Pope John Paul II, a reach out to young people to say, can we preach the gospel in such a way that attracts young people to us? Can we loosen up, not necessarily in practice of traditions, but in the way we evangelize? Can we reach out? You see, for the most part, the Catholic Church waits for you to come to church. The only time they come to you is when they are coming to administer the sacrament of the anointing of the sick. And usually you don't take 2 days after you've gotten that sacrament.
But we've seen some tremendously...
So when you are a little bit the kind of Simon Peter that I am. And that's why perhaps for many folks, including you, many don't even think I am Catholic because of just the way I speak or carry myself.
You wear your rosary, so it's definitely you're as Catholic as they
But
come.
when I show up wearing my rosary, it is as surprising as it would be if you saw me with a box cut. So it's...
I should tell you, I was surprisingly, before Archbishop Semogere became the Archbishop of Kampala Diocese, I got invited through family. One of my close family members is a family member of his. So we're invited to his place in Masaka at the time. And I spent a whole day with him. He has an incredible discipline in his daytime to what he eats, what he listens to, what he reads. And you could clearly see this is a man who has had this discipline for almost 2 decades. It's not going to change in the meantime. So when he became the Archbishop, I was actually surprised. It's like this. I thought this man was going to stay in Masaka for long. Here he is as Archbishop. So
well, I knew
maybe,
him as a Monsignor at Christ the King.
Yes.
Then he goes to, I think, Luwero, Kasana as bishop, and then there he becomes Archbishop, and possibly, who knows, he's possibly one of the contenders for the next cardinal because one age is on his side, and of course, superintending over the largest in terms of population archdiocese in Uganda. There are four of them. So, I mean, you know, he's up and about. But again, the evangelization of young people needs to be in such a way that even for any other business, let's look at religion, let's say as a business. You must be at the forefront of quick innovation to keep attracting the different tastes and preferences of young people whose attention span is every day narrowing down to the least that it can be. So I think those should be the concerns that our prelates are trying to handle and attend to. But you talked about the influence of the Catholic Church on the body politic in Uganda. Doesn't it surprise you that for the so many presidents this country has had, none of them, I'm talking about the president of the nation, has been Catholic?
But traditionally, every vice president has been Catholic.
I'm not so sure because I don't think Dr. Samson Kiseka was...
Okay, the exception Dr. Samson, but Jessica Lupo, Edward Sekandi.
Yes.
And there's even
yes,
there's an unwritten rule and myth or matter code that the Catholic Church suggests people.
But why do you seem to imagine Uganda started in 1986?
No, I'm not saying it started in 1986. I'm just saying there seems to be some unwritten or matter code in Uganda's body politic
as from 1986,
that the Catholic Church must have members in the cabinet. So John Chrysostom Muyingo, for example,
you can't avoid them. You say they are in terms of population.
Yes,
they are the vanguards of the best education system. So most likely, not you want educated people. So you really can't avoid them. But I was trying to speak to the fact that those who profess the Catholic faith to the strictest sense of it, there is a certain character that we are not taught. Even when you go to catechism, they ask to be humble. When someone slaps you on the left hand, the right cheek, there's a way we are trained to meet loss. And that's why you will find, look at the character of the late Honorable Paul Kawanga Semogere. That should tell you of a typical Catholic politician. I mean, this guy won the 1980 election. You know that for a fact. But he's not the one that went to court or the bush.
Well, you now have the reigning opposition candidate who is as Catholic as they come. He's as Catholic as they come.
I think he professes the jobless kind of arrangement. The Catholic thing is really for convenience.
In terms of the political, we cannot run away from the political influence of the church on our politics.
But you see, the ability to come forward and lead, yes? And that can also, and I remember, it was Al-Mazlui, yes. Was Al-Mazlui or it was Mamdani, one of those two professors, I forget who, but one of them who attended a conference, a Buganda conference, and looked at the people in the room, the Buganda people, and said, guys, it's unfortunate that you are the majority ethnic group in Uganda, but for some elements, you have a certain disposition of a minority. And the same could be said of the Catholic Church, that you are the majority, but you have a certain behavioral disposition as if you're a minority and a marginalized group of people. Why? Because you don't actually viciously fight for what you believe you deserve and should have. The best person you want to cheat, and they will just wish you blessings and just make the sign of the cross and bless you, is a Catholic guy. But try it on another person of another religion or who has no religion at all.
I think
They will hound you down and
Yes.
take pound for pound. But we in the Catholic Church are taught a bit differently. And that's why you act in a certain manner and your Catholic kin will say, our religion doesn't teach us to behave this way. And so for that, people have earned or lost huge opportunities because of that. I mean, for example, in Uganda, to get anything in a serious position, you will hear, even those who get positions on merit, they are discredited for the first many months. Why? Because everyone assumes it's more like an unwritten rule that you have to lobby to become anything in this country. We as Catholics, the word lobby really does not come out that, well, like you said, there's an unwritten rule that there must be Catholic vice president. I think that lobby was done some time back, but it's not done overtly. There's a way it's done, but these other groups, they don't just lobby. They outrightly beg, demand, and act like they...
Yeah.
Like there's a sense of...
So Simon, I just want to say that, and on this, the machinery...
Entitlement.
Yes, the machinery of the Catholic Church is a little bit complex and complicated to understand.
Absolutely.
Unlike other religious dominations, and no offense to them, the Catholic Church runs an almost parallel system to the government of Uganda.
Mm-hmm.
The same way the government of Uganda has parishes, the Catholic Church has parishes. The Monsignor in the area is pretty much like the Member of Parliament of the parishes in that area. You have the Papal Nuncio here, who is the equivalent, some equivalent of the President, who accounts to the Vatican. The Papal Nuncio speaks to the Vatican almost on a weekly. And that hierarchical structure delivers a message from the Vatican to the lowest rank of the church and back every week. It can be very...
on the character of how you should behave at a personal level.
Yes.
That's why that level of meticulous social organization, clothed in religion, has, in Uganda's case, not substantially delivered a Catholic president.
Yeah. So where we've seen the Catholic Church succeed, for example, in terms of getting leaders, so like in Argentina, things like when people used to go...
In Argentina, it's 99.96 Catholic.
Yes, but there's this, I'll pass you on the book, that the dictatorship got to a time where they were using priests to say, who was confessing to sins of murder in your priest box? And if you didn't say, they would kill you. So the church got to a point where it became like a parallel system. We've seen it succeed in Kinshasa, for example, in the Ebola response. Yes. For the church to say, we can't be more effective than the DRC government. We get to more places than the DRC government does, but they didn't have to overtly show that they are very powerful. It's just, this is the subtle presence that the church has. So I think that the lobby is in that quiet machinery.
Absolutely. I mean, in Uganda, there is the movement that you never see around. I can tell you the operations of the Opus Dei, for example, are deeper and more enlightened than ESO, and that outfit that we know as CMI combined.
No.
The level of information.
Yes.
The Opus Dei, for example, has about me or you or anybody watching
confess your sins.
Forget about even confessing your sins. They know. Each parishioner, they know.
Yeah.
Okay?
So that's the thing. Like on my village, for example, there's a church directly opposite mine. It's a Catholic church. Everyone on the village is registered to the church, so they know you, your children. But I always found this machinery, for example, that delivered. The Holy Eucharist has to come straight from here all the way to every village. But there's a machinery that delivers it.
Absolutely.
And
there has never been a delay or an undersupply.
Yes. It's effective. It's very effective. Even the machinery delivers wine.
And now you bring about a very important point, Raymond, that we need to look at as we look at the Catholic Church in broadness. There's a certain level of meticulous operation. And this we are seeing in this rite as the Pope's funeral. See, everything is down to the finest detail of script and tradition from ages back. It can only be compared to maybe what we saw with the burial and all that of Queen Elizabeth. Yeah, and the same would happen for King Charles, God forbid. So it's traditional merit and meritocracy. And that's why the schools of Catholic foundation have a certain way they behave. And of course, eventually, there's been a dilution of some of those, that's why you got some schools, and I don't want to mention some of them, but some of them really disgust me to the core. You write to them and they can't reply. Then you go there and find that school is outpopulating the place, people that don't merit being in those places. So there's a bit of secularism that has come in, but we hope that now with a new Pope, renewed hope, renewed everything, then will now bring about that kind of change. A wild card to throw on the table, Raymond. I like, historic stories around the papacy and the Catholic Church. Did you know that for the history of the Holy See, Uganda was the first country, and perhaps the only one so far, that has sent a female ambassador to the Holy See?
I didn't know. I'm learning.
1975. No other than Idi Amin Dada sent a 29-year-old Ugandan lady, Her Excellency Ambassador Bernadette Olowo, to represent Uganda at the Holy See. Now, at the Vatican, it was a first, the Pope to receive credentials from a female as ambassador. But guess what? The Pope at the time, Pope John Paul VI, received.
Yes. And we must end this podcast here, because if we get into discussing the church and women, we might get banished. We really might get banished.
Well, like if you watch the trailer of the conclave, the sister in there says, in as much as in this church we are told to be silent as women, God has still blessed us with ears and eyes. It means they can also make very good use of their mouths.
Yes. Thank you so much to everyone that's listened to us on the Grab a Coffee podcast. We come to you, of course, every week on Friday at 9, and then you can follow us on everywhere that you get your podcasts from. We're very glad to those of you that subscribe, like, follow, and share us with your friends. Please continue to do that, and we will continue to bring you immense, interesting conversations with Rare Access. Have yourselves a good day.